next, all the way from Sri Lanka, this man has seen real recession. He's seen an economic collapse. He's left the UK where he was working, had a stable job. He came back to Sri Lanka to build the Bitcoin ecosystem in his country. He's here to share his story. Building Bitnomi, we have Sajith Caldera.
Woo! Thank you, man. Hey guys, you guys can hear me, right? Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. You know, it's been an eye-opener for me to come out here and talk to you guys. Since we're neighbors, you know, it's about time that we connect, right, for the first time. But I think we've got a long way to go, seeing what you guys have achieved here. First of all, you know, thank you and well done to Bichala and Plebs Together Strong. Let's give them a round of applause, right? And I'm sure more of my community will come up here. I'm gonna make sure that they're here next time to learn from you guys. So, this is a little bit of a different scenery and a bit sobering, okay? But this is not a fear-mongering lesson or a presentation. You're not supposed to be scared, but I just want you to know that this happened next door, only 3 years ago, just 3 years ago, right? The problem is that as Bitcoiners, we always talking about fiat dying, but I don't know if we actually know what it feels and the reality behind that thought of what happens when fiat actually dies. And I'm about to show you the reality on the ground, okay? Like I said, we're all on Twitter. We see a lot of stuff like fiat's dead, and it usually follows up with a meme or a headline. But what does it actually look like? What happens when a currency that 23 million people trusted for over 60, 70 years, overnight, just dies? Of course, I have to introduce my beautiful island, right? We're known for our beaches, tea, cricket, right? And our hospitality. We pride in ourselves in that, right? We love it. And if you haven't been there, please go and visit my country. But beneath all this beauty, there's something that was hidden. A very fragile economy, a very fragile currency. The things that I'm gonna say, some Sri Lankans might not like it, but this is the reality. But there's a story behind this, and I'm gonna turn it good at the end, because there is a happy ending, almost, kind of, right? The domino effect. Where did it all start? A lot of people have many opinions on this, right? Bitcoiners might say it started when we established our central bank. Or we might say that it started when we got our independence. But let's not talk about that. Let's go back to recent history and figure out where it actually mattered. The problem was always existing, but it came to the surface in 2019, April. The Easter bombings took lives of 200 to 300 people, and this is something that internally shook me, and this is when I realized my journey back to Sri Lanka from UK, this is when it started. Just the thought process of it, because I was living in UK. Then, of course, we know what happened with COVID-19. Whatever the opinions that you have on it, our leaders, our politicians chose to close the whole country for over a year. Now, we survive off tourism. People visiting our beautiful country, spending their dollars so we can have our reserve. Now, Easter bombings, loss of tourism, 2020, of course, COVID, zero tourism. Then they thought it was smart to completely ban fertilizers. Okay? Now, they thought, oh yeah, it's for the good of the people, let's eat healthy. Great idea, right? But no planning. Just over a week, they decided no chemical fertilizer to be used, imported. And we all think we know why they did it, because fertilizer costs dollars and we were running out of dollars, right? But just imagine a country just like India. We survive off our own agriculture. We don't try to import many food items. But overnight, the yield of the crops fell by almost 60%. Then, of course, all of these things led to a default of our foreign debt for the first time. In fact, it was the first country, I believe, in South Asia to do this. And that became the turning on of the money printer. Printer really did go burr. Over 1 year, over 400 billion LKR was printed. And quarter of this was actually printed over 1 day. Okay? Over 100 billion LKR was printed over 1 day in 2022, I believe. Now, the collapse. Now, I heard one of the gentlemen from UK mentioned that India had an inflation of 100%, I believe, over 15 years. That's not bad in Sri Lankan terms. Now, you can see in 2022, our prices were around, what, $200. Overnight, it became 356, actually around 60. Overnight, just happened. You wake up in the morning, you realize that your assets, your savings, everything that you invested, everything that you have is now worth almost half. And then began, obviously, the worst financial crisis that we've ever seen, and that obviously started the Hunger Games, the real life Hunger Games, the reality. Now, this is where you really need to pay attention to what happens when your currency fails. And I hope it never happens to you guys. This is a picture of a fuel queue. I guess petrol, diesel, right? So it looks like something that usually happens in these countries, but it usually lasts maybe a day, right? But these people, for these people, it's lasted for over a week. These people were staying in these queues for over a week, and they didn't leave. They couldn't leave. If you know about sunken cost fallacy, when you give too much to something, you don't want to let it go, because you think you're going to lose. Yesterday, you asked me why I was sad. When I was going through this, it kind of brought back so many memories, actually. Obviously, small queues turn into bigger queues. They start sleeping in these queues because, of course, they don't want to go home. They don't want to lose their spot. Multiple members of families now start taking turns in these queues. Now, when older generation takes turns, even worse problems happen. And of course, the younger generation also got it. The army was deployed at the petrol stations because it started getting a little bit violent. Of course, the corruption, people saw some corruption happening, then they didn't like it, so the government had to obviously control this. Then the deaths. People were dying on these queues. Over 40 people recorded. Just the recorded, you know how these numbers work, okay? I don't need to tell you. 40 people died of exhaustion, cardiac arrest, and fatigue. This is obviously a picture of somebody that passed away. It's very unfortunate. Now, this is a picture of a gas queue. I'm sure you guys, apparently I heard yesterday that you guys don't have these gas cylinders anymore, but in Sri Lanka, around 90% of the population still have these gas cylinders. I have a very distinct memory of these cylinders, actually. How it works, just to give you guys a summary, every family's got one of these cylinders. And usually it's full when you buy it from the gas distributor. Once it's finished, you take it to the distributor and you get another one. But you pay for this as a deposit, right? I don't know the price, something like that. Of course, it wasn't just the petrol and the diesel that ran out. Our cooking gas also ran out. That means people couldn't eat. Even if you had food, you don't have gas to cook. Okay. My memory of it is the sound that these gas canisters actually made. It sounded a bit like, a ring, something clinging together, like cling, 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 cling. But imagine 1,000 canisters clinging to each other over hours, because every single time they heard a rumor that the local gas distributor had some gas, everybody in the town would queue up. But this time, they actually did have some gas, so they were moving like this with their canister. It's heavy. So they have to move like this. And it clings to the next person's. So 1,000 clings was the sound that I kept hearing. So when I came outside and I saw this queue, and I was like, wow. For some reason, that was a vivid memory for me, and I still remember it. Of course, when fuel goes, when oil, gas goes, your grid shuts down. Even if we have a high capacity for renewable energy, in the monsoon season, non-monsoon season, so when it's not raining, we still run off gas and oil, right? So the blackout started. Started with 8 hours a day. Then it turned to 10 hours a day. And then it went up to 15 hours a day. So if you had a business just about feeding yourself, just forget about it. And when these things happen, hospitals start shutting down because you cannot operate without emergency power supplies. One by one, local smaller hospitals start shutting down. And I don't need to tell you what happens when that happens, right? I'll let you guys obviously think about that. Now, this is a picture of an engineer. I run an engineering company. So my engineers had to live like this. All the other engineers had to live like this because even generators needed fuel. So they were living off car batteries. There was a black market for these things. If you're fortunate enough to find fuel, which I was, it costed $8 a liter, okay? $8 a liter. I mean, for Sri Lanka, it's very expensive. I'm sure it's expensive for the rest of the world too. So usually it costs 75 cents. So look at the inflation on that. So the 67% inflation rates that they officially said made sense, right? Now let's talk about the government side of things. Obviously it's a little, I guess, controversial, but they forced USD conversions. So if you had any USD, they would forcefully convert every month. Doesn't matter how much USD you had, they would take it. And to this day, you cannot pay for stuff abroad. So if you had an examination that you had to take, recently one of my employees had to do that, you had to go to the bank, beg the guy, show the invoices to transfer $2,000 to India, right? So these are some of the stuff. And of course, the social media blackouts, you guys are used to that, right? You guys know what happens when the government doesn't want social media to spread these things. The revolt, Sri Lankans are very nice people. But when enough was enough, it really was enough. So when government was doing these things and everybody was suffering, on April the 3rd, it's just a flyer that was calling people to come together, and we called it the struggle. There was a name for this. It was called Aragalaya. In my language, that means the struggle. The struggle to kick them out. And so did my island burn. And this is where it started. There were two sects, non-violent protesters and the violent protesters. It started pretty violently. So they thus started burning things, mainly the politicians' houses. They all got paid back by our money. But still, this wasn't a good look. And then, this was the presidential secretary's building. Hundreds of thousands of people marched and marched inside and kicked them out. It was that simple. And this was the slogan. This is not political. This really happened. I just wanted to tell you guys the story. And this was the swimming pool of our president. Of course, I don't need to tell you about Bitcoin. P2P markets blew at this time. They found out what USDT and Bitcoin can do. And while the movement wasn't that strong when it comes to Bitcoin, there were people, pockets of people still stacking $1 a day for years. And this is one example. Is an ex-Navy soldier, now a taxi driver, and he saved every day stacked sats, $1 a day. And when I spoke to him about this, his experience, and he said, I'm glad I found Bitcoin because it saved my purchasing power, and I will never let it go because it became a lifesaver for him. And where do we stand today? Sri Lankans are super resilient. Our people are super resilient. 30 years of war, and all of this couldn't really bring us down. All the figures by the officials, they said that they are looking good, but we never actually got our fiat purchasing power back. To this day, it never returned to the normal times. As we know, the current regime, they're doing their best, I guess, but governments never shrink, they expand. So the problem continues. So we decided that after seeing this in 2024, there was no way for Sri Lankans to buy Bitcoin. And we said, okay, one storm has passed, the next one's coming, let's build the bridge, and we'll make sure when the next one comes, that no Sri Lankan is left behind. They will always at least have the option, access to the hardest asset that was ever built for us. So we started building, and we're trying to take back control of our money. Teaching, education, this is happening as not as big as you guys, but it's happening. Slowly, grassroots, all funded by us. And the message is, this is proof, Sri Lanka is proof of what happens when fiat dies and why Bitcoin must survive. Thank you guys.